Okay. So we have three things to look at, and the first one.
Ms. Smith, I spoke to Chairman Moon at the break, so I'd like to say something before you get started.
Go ahead.
Colleagues, before we get started, I spoke to Chairman Moon as someone who serves on the Governance Committee, and my concern is that I'm not sure how many of you have had a chance to actually review all of the information, but here's my concern. We need to be doing good work. And
I really need to interrupt because we have an issue here, and I need to lay out the information on the table before you speak up. Okay, so if you don't mind. We had a governance committee meeting. 3 of the 4 members were at the meeting. We did our work. I'm sorry Mrs. McLaughlin wasn't there. Based on the work we did in that meeting, we're bringing forward a report today. As chairman of that committee, I would never push the board to do work the board wasn't ready to do. I am prepared today to report out on the work the committee did. The board does not have a regulation or a rule that all the members need to be there at the committee. With the late hour, I would like to move forward and get us through this work rather than focus on, you don't even know what we're going to say about this because you weren't at the meeting. So I would like to be able to move forward.
Well, Ms. Smith, the whole point that I spoke to earlier as well was actually to understand what it is that you planned to do with this information, because there's a lot of information here. So it would be helpful for all of us as board members that when we come into a meeting, that it's not that you're just going to present it. Are we taking action on it tonight or not? And knowing that in advance would be helpful.
Okay, so I'm going to get started. The first item is the Human Relations Advisory Committee membership. That committee came to the governance committee and asked us to make a change in their membership. So you'll see a detailed memo that talks about this. They came to the governance committee a couple of times. We had questions. The answers to our questions are listed in this document. The part of their focus was that they had certain groups that weren't showing up. They wanted to keep their number of members at 38, but making a change by including some organizations as named organizations and then reducing the number of organizations. If you look at the handout with the excerpt from the governance manual, in C, the Office of Equity and Employee Relations used to be able to nominate up to 6. They want to change that to 4 because they listed out different organizations. So if you look at the governance page, it's probably easier. So there really isn't a Hispanic Committee of Virginia. They want to use the Hispanic Educators Association. The same thing is the Asian Educators Association to get representation there. The Community Ministry of Northern Virginia they've had, just a name change with the secondary, it's the High School Principals Association. And then they've had the Jewish Community Relations Council coming and the American Association of University Women. So, you know, the idea is if you have any questions, but we will do our usual work, is that this will be new business in action for a change for the governance manual. So any questions or concerns about this? Sandy?
During the conversation, we had discussed some other organizations, and Mrs. Goddard was going to contact them. So, in particular, Hakan, did you? Oh, okay. So I don't see them listed, and another organization that I think might be added here would be COTS, since they're not on here. But have we contacted? Has anyone contacted Hakan to see if that's? Okay. Well, so that was a conversation that we had in governance, whether Hakan might be a good organization to add.
So the feedback that came back from staff was that these were the ones they wanted to add, knowing they have 4 slots. So, there was no feedback to say, let's have other named ones, but they do have the 4 groups to look at other, nominees that they want to put in there.
And my advocacy would be to add COTS and Hakan.
Okay. Ryan?
So I see you're taking off OCA and replacing that with Community Ministry of Northern Virginia. Those are very distinct. That's a very different group, I would assume. And I would also presume that Chinese Americans could be subsumed under Asian educators. I just wonder if there's a reasoning behind that substitution.
So, and I want you to know, this did not come from the governance committee. This is coming from the HRAC and their advocacy. This wasn't us determining who should be on this committee. I think the real focus was their frustration with the groups that they were trying to ask that weren't showing up, and they had certain groups that would show up and some they couldn't get a hold of. So they were just trying to have a realistic group of who should be there.
Okay, I don't want to discuss this in depth at this table, but if we're going to be adding religious groups, I think with the discussions we're having around religious holidays pertaining to the Muslim community, especially in Mason District and elsewhere, it would be smart to add them as well, but especially pertaining to our calendar discussions. So that might just be a question we return to them with.
So, and I don't know if that falls out in number 2 on their list, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Council. We don't know the details of all the work. All we can go by is this was their recommendation that they wanted to bring to us. Janie?
Yeah, I was going to say with HRAC, what they do is there will be a number of appointments that they will make outside of what we have in the governance manual, because their attempt is to try to get broad input from all basic groups within the county. And what happens over time is that, for example, with the Hispanic Committee of Virginia, they no longer exist, but they still need we still need representation, and so their suggestion was Hispanic educators. Korean Association of Northern Virginia no longer exists under that headline. They used to. And so they said instead let's do Asian Educators Association, so we get that. The Organization of Chinese Americans does not exist. So this is kind of why they came to us and trying to get, but if there are other groups that they feel will broadly represent Muslim community, what have you, they have the ability to go out and find a group that's willing to come. And they said that tends to be their frustration, is that they will send out invitations to groups, and they may come for 1 meeting or 2 meetings, and then they kind of fall off because they try to get a broad representation. So this is their attempt to try to make sure that they have a broad enough representation across all possible groups so that we are hearing for people wide enough. And partly, Mr. McElveen, it is for the calendaring situation and all the rest of it. So this was their best attempt at trying to go back in and actually get commitments from groups that are broadly based in the community.
And if I remember correctly, I think, didn't they say sometimes they choose those groups based on what their charge is and what the work is they have to do?
Yes, that there needs to be some flexibility, and they are always able in any given year to fill in if there is a group that has become active again or that they know can actually send a representative. They will, because we always give them so many slots that they can just simply fill. So that's kind of where they are. So this was not us, it was them.
Are there any other questions? Dan.
It didn't say that what I saw there. Was there any effort to explicitly contact these groups and they advised one way or the other?
Yes, they definitely did that, and those were questions that came out of the governance committee. So if you look at, was it on the second page of this? They talked about which committees no longer exist, currently exist, and so there have been efforts made over the years. Elizabeth.
So, in reference to Mr. McElveen's comment about calendaring issues and communities of faith, piggybacking on a conversation we had in the Public Engagement Committee today about pursuing a potential I don't know whether you call it a summit or something with organization of faith and having an outreach. What's notably missing here is, other than, a Christian or a Catholic organization, and those are significant holidays as well. So I don't want us to start heading down the path of, well, because some have a desire or an influence to adjust a public school calendar to include their holidays, that all of a sudden they become a favored status. Either we're going to throw a wider net and engage communities of faith, or we're not. And it would include on this organization. And the opportunities for everything from student service hours, students who are pursuing a service learning cord, all kinds of things would promote the idea that we're going to broaden rather than narrow our outreach. And whether they show up or not is something that we can determine down the road. But I'm concerned about, being myopic in inclusion.
Thank you. So my recommendation is that we move forward for new business in action. Sandy, I don't know how the committee feels about adding 2 other committees and how they feel to the work. They did do this to keep it to 38 members. So if we want to follow up and get a response about those 2 organizations you've talked about, we can get that response, and then it could be an amendment
Okay.
to it.
So will
I don't feel comfortable saying, okay, we're just going to add this without feedback.
Okay, so will that come from, who will that come from then to?
I would ask if Pam would follow up with Sherry
Okay.
and get that
All
feedback
right,
to us.
that's fine.
And then we can determine
we
from
can
there.
assess it when we get the
Right.
answer from
Right.
them. That's fine.
Because we do want to be sensitive, too, to committees being too large. Okay? All right, so I
Mrs.
don't...
Smith? Mrs. Smith?
I'm sorry.
I certainly understand the sensitivity of not having the advisory committee too big, too large, but I think I owe a duty to contact Korean Association of Northern Virginia. There is a successor organization of that organization under a different name, and see whether they are not interested at all in participating. And if they are interested, I'll get back to you.
I think if you got back to Mrs. Goddard and then she could share that with the committee, that would
Yes,
be
ma'am.
great. Okay, thank you. I don't have a date yet when this would be new business in action, but we'll get that scheduled, and we'll make sure we have that information ahead of time. Okay. The next thing on the list is the Fairfax County School Board 2014 draft board goals. So let me take you down memory lane. When we had our retreat last July, one of the things that we asked Hank to do was to come up with goals for us, because we said that we wanted to do more outreach, we wanted to have a national voice. So at the governance committee meeting, what we did was look at his suggested goals and came up with a suggestion of what we think we should bite off now and what we think that perhaps we should put off till later, or see if the board was even interested in. So in the goal 1, where it says develop the Fairfax County School Board voice in promoting FCPS as a state and national leader in public education, the governance committee felt like that was something that the board was interested in doing. And I do want to say the dates on here were based on if we had already started down this road, so kind of ignore the dates. They would have to be plugged in as new dates as we moved forward. So part of our discussion at the governance committee meeting, and this included the superintendent, was perhaps identifying 2 priorities. We talked about the federal reform of assessment and accountability for No Child Left Behind. We talked about graduation requirements and related assessments. We talked about full funding for pre-K. So that we thought that perhaps the board, we might not want just 2 priorities, might be 3, but I think we want to tie this into the other work we're doing. So we talked about the board doing that. Hank's suggestion was finding the top 2 lobbying priorities, identifying 1 or 2 board members to take a lead, and they would delve in and understand it, and then developing a communication plan and lobbying strategies. So before we go down the road of planning this work, the thing we're trying to do today is just get a feeling from the board. Is that something we're interested in? So what I'd like to do is just kind of talk in that high overview of the whole document, and then I'll come back to it. Tammy, did you have a question? Okay. Because I think we need the big picture. Because when I read this whole thing, it was like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't know how we do it all. So then in the second section, it's the sharing successes action steps. And this is where we talked about perhaps presenting at national organization meetings or state organization meetings. And some of the deadlines are really soon. Pam got this for us. So like if we wanted to go present at AASA, their deadline for proposals is May 16th this year. So I don't even see that that's a possibility that we could pull that together. The Council of Great City Schools was April 18th. Sure we can. CUBE was already proposal deadline was May 1st. NSBA, their call for workshop proposals will open May 1st. And then their deadline is June 16. And then VSBA will publish on their website a call for presenters. So we have some idea of timeline for this, but we need time to develop stuff.
What was the VSBA deadline?
They don't have a deadline yet. In June or July, they'll publish a call for presenters. Okay? So, and then based on what work we want to do, and if we want to set proposals, we need to decide how we want to do that. I don't know if this is a process that we can spend a year getting details about issues and we work to present for the following year, but these are the things we need to discuss. Then in the goal 2, this was really a lot of the issues we deal with our meetings. Ensure board meetings are efficient and effective. And I don't think we have a real good sense. I think some of us that were at the governance committee meeting felt like some of this isn't worth going down. We've kind of been handling it. We don't think it's really an issue. But we really needed to get to your concerns about it. So the first one with go-backs, is this really about calling the question when we go on too long? And then there was an area on time spent in discussions, action steps, that really about keeping more data and keeping track of this. I don't think we felt like an overwhelming, I think our impression was this wasn't an overwhelming need right now, that if we can only do so many things, let's focus on the advocacy. But we're kind of here to find out what your viewpoint is and what you want to do. So I'm going to go back to the goal 1 now. Any questions or feedback about that? Megan.
My concern going back to the retreat is that I think it's interestingly goes back to, again, about being strategic. I love the idea of a school system of our size and capabilities to be a leader, but this is a school system that is now adjusting to a brand new superintendent. We're trying to roll out strategic governance. We're trying to, the strategic plan. We're trying to roll out the portrait of a graduate. And we have quite a few things on our plate that we have come to identify as really being board focused. And so my worry is that this is just going to be, yet again, one more thing that's so well-intentioned, but are we really ready yet? Because I actually think the Portrait of the Graduate strategic planning that Dr. Garza has could be very influential. In the end, I think based on what you've laid out here, if there are individual board members that are passionate and have the time in their schedules and want to go take the consensus of the board and lobby at the state and national level on an issue in concert with the superintendent. But I worry that anything that we decide to do, we will have to draw away the superintendent's time and attention too. And I just don't know if we need to wait a year and really let Karen focus on the things that she made her goal and we shared in her goal, rather than to have this now in 2014.
Thank you. I have Pat.
Okay, and I think this kind of follows on what Megan was just saying. I'm wondering, the first bullet there, by June 15th, the board will identify the top 2 lobbying priorities.
Right, ignore the dates.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, totally
Okay.
ignore the
Sorry,
dates, because
sorry.
we have to decide we want to do this, then we'll set dates.
Okay,
So
I wasn't
ignore
even
the
going,
dates.
right, I wasn't even going on the dates, I'm sorry. But, okay, the board will identify the top 2 and then identify 1 or 2 board members. So I'm kind of thinking that the most likely way this will happen organically is if there are members of the board who want to work together and are motivated to do something, bring it to the board, and that's sort of the process, I'm guessing. That makes sense?
The only thing that I think we need to do is, it can't be ad hoc, you just decide to do it. The board has to decide we want to spend the time on this. The board has to decide, okay, it's okay for 1 or 2 board members to bring this to us, because it has to be a board agreement. So that's the only
Sure.
caveat.
So that's what I was thinking. 1 or 2 board members, bring it to the full board. The full board has to agree that it's worth us being behind. But
The one thing we talked about in governance, though, was the whole board decides what the topics are. Okay? And then you send people off to do the work about what those issues are. So it's not like you send somebody off to do work about an issue and then we decide. We decide as a whole, these are our priorities.
okay, well, I mean, I like it. I like the idea that if I have something that I would like us to be lobbying at some level on, that I kind of have a structure and a way to do it. So I'm in favor of this.
I too like what's there under Goal 1. A couple things. I'm glad you said ignore the dates, because I do think that these points should be part of our strategic planning efforts. And if that was, and that's what governance needs to do. That's where I think a lot of the ideas should come up from governance as to what's going to evolve into the broader considerations for an overall strategic plan. So that makes sense to me. I just wanted to mention, for those of us who went to NSBA, and I was not at PEC this morning. I had 2 other meetings this morning, and perhaps you discussed this a little bit, and you can talk about that later. But the communication plans for lobbying, NSBA, and we had talked about their national network, when we had, so I would like us to include that and look at that. And also they have that Stand Up for Public Education, which, I think that is a excellent thematic approach, stand up for public education. Miss Reed, I have a T-shirt for you that says that. For Patty and I, that was our big payment for coordinating the video. Patty and I received T-shirts. I have it at home for you. And but I think we need to. I would like to add that is when we're coming to look at what NSBA offers, because I think as many of us have seen as we start exploring it, I understand they're still in a what they call as a soft rollout phase, and so which basically means they haven't got all the kinks out of their plan yet either. But I would like us to work more in conjunction with them, because I think they're already a national organization that is dealing with this and focusing on this, and it makes perfect sense. They are very close to where they're located in Alexandria. Yeah, and so I think, so my 2 points would be yes, these are good ideas as stated. I think when we come up to our overall strategic plan, these should be rolled into it. But and that third point particularly, or maybe add a point, explore additional opportunities with NSBA and see where they are on communications as well as their lobbying function.
And that can be one of the considerations for timing, is that we want to get through the strategic plan. We want to get through July, and then we start to look at this in September. We need to be realistic about when we want to bite these pieces off and what we want to do with our workload. I have Ryan next.
So I was going to, as you all know, I sit on the VSBA Legislative Positions Committee, and that meets mid-July. We just got the meeting date today. So every year, as part of that, I go down and lobby them on issues that are pertinent to us. This year, I know, working with Michael Malloy, that we're probably going to bring some things back for board action to respond to what happened in Richmond this year. So that might be, as we look for a work session time in advance of that, a time to talk at least about our state priorities for the coming year, and some of those might dovetail with national.
Thank you. Sandy.
I think that this is, it's good that I'm following Ryan, because one of the concerns I have is that it tracks over some of the things we're already doing, and I wouldn't want us to be having more people doing the same thing. I think we already have a liaison with the state, we have a liaison with the federal government, and it would be natural for those people, which it does change, but I think for the folks who are already in that position to be the ones who promote that. I mean, that would be, rather than have it be two new board members. And I guess my only other concern then is when you get into the last bullets, then we're developing, we're spending a significant amount of time and resources developing plans and reviewing plans. I would almost say, look at bullet 1 and 2, identify the lobbying priorities, turn it over to our liaisons who we already have, and let it develop that way. I get concerned that we might be going too far down this path and putting too much work on staff to develop plans. So I would almost say cut back in terms of it being quite this organized. I think once we have chosen our priorities, some of this will develop, and particularly with the people who are already our liaisons and are used to, in essence, lobbying.
My memory of our conversation in the governance work session is coming up too, because didn't the superintendent mention about maybe providing a white paper on some of these issues, because we're looking at them anyway? So she had mentioned that.
Well, it says a clearly defined position statement, and I think that a white paper would be a clearly defined position statement. I don't know that we want to go a whole lot beyond that. But I could be wrong.
Right.
I'm just saying, we can only do so many things.
And I would imagine the reason Hank put those other bullets there is if you're going to do something, you need to hold yourself accountable. And how do you do that? And this is wherever the comfort level of the board is, where we go with this. So I think it's a good discussion. I have Janie, then Elizabeth.
Yeah, again, remembering what Dr. Garza had said as well, I think that our major initiatives on Portrait of a Graduate, balanced assessment, which at the state level, there are pieces in place, and I know that the educators are working on that, that I agree. I think we have to kind of wait now to make further progress on the pieces that are already, that we're already working on. And Dr. Garza did say that she felt that she and our own staff would be in a better position to do some white papers by August based on the work that is already being done, because I know she is already keyed into a lot of this stuff. And I think a year from now at NSBA, we may be ready to really roll out and advocate for, based on the work that is now being done within our school system by your own LT and by Dr. Garza, and then be able to put into that. One of the things, comment from NSBA and Stand Up for Public Schools, it is always interesting to hear what everybody's doing across the country. I think we are not under as much attack as what public schools are facing in other parts of the country. It was rather startling as you read all of your reports and read all of your literature to see how tough some of this is in some of the other states, and that we are we are not as in quite the same corner, thankfully, that I think other public schools and other public school systems are in other states. But I think that's where, in a year from now, I think we can probably help, and our natural advocacy at VSBA.
I mean, my feeling from listening to the board is that we want to be able to help change things. And I look at what we did with the legislative packet this year and telling the legislators that we wanted changes in the testing. And so they did something. So all this feeds into where we want to go. We just need to decide time and how we want to do it. Elizabeth?
So I guess I'm very much of the same ilk as is Ms. Evans. When I look at this, I believe that we already have the organizational structure in place vis-a-vis a forum. If somebody is ready to take something to a lobbying effort beyond that which exists either in our state or federal liaisons, and we get the opportunity to decide as a board, well, is that something we just want to refer over to our liaison? Do we want to do a work session? Do we want more information beyond, a white paper from Dr. Garza? So I see this as duplicative of that which is already in place, and I don't want us tripping over our own toes. In terms of, once we identify something, we either put it into our annual lobbying package to go to the Virginia General Assembly, prior to the start of session, and work through it with Michael if it's a state issue. So I don't know that this adds anything that's a value add. And I think it maybe kind of confuses the lines which we've already established.
Okay, Ted?
I'm all in with this. I think this is really good stuff. With regard to the lobbying efforts, the first item there, I see this as a matter of raising the profile and not necessarily replacing or duplicating something else. So it could well be the case that it is the legislative chairs who are carrying the load here. But there's something about the tone of this, of setting a goal and saying this is really important, that raises the profile. So to me, this is a good thing. On the second one, sharing successes, I have to say, I've gone to now NSBA twice and VSBA a couple of times, and, you see some presentations that are quite good, and you see some that, it was a waste of time. That always happens in any field, at any conference, okay? But I think we've got a lot of talented people in the school system. We are doing a lot of great work in the school system, and I think we should be sharing it. And the issue is that there's a long runway, right, to get onto the programs. So we need to get going, honestly. So I think we need to be moving out on this, and the things that are here are great examples of things that honestly should be sort of off the shelf, at least from the standpoint of throwing together a proposal. And I don't mean to be competitive, but I've been to things that Arlington County has done, and I have been so impressed by the work that they're doing. And there are things we can learn from them, but likewise, there are things that we can be showing to other school districts, and we're not. We know those things here. So the last item, and I'm sensitive to the point about biting off more than we can chew. And as I look at this list, maybe the third item, the long-term changes, maybe that is one that we could defer, but I'm all in on the first two.
Thank you. Patty?
I think it's really important that we begin to be recognized as leaders on the national stage and in the Commonwealth. And I do think that we've talked about that, and I do think that as liaisons, some of us have been doing some of that, and others who are interested have been doing some of that. But I do think that we can be a little more strategic and thoughtful and impactful. I think that we can be developing relationships, for example, even if we don't have a particular agenda to put forth today. When I went up to the Hill with NSBA, you know, that's what it was, really, was developing relationships with the staff, meeting with the elected officials, and beginning to pave the way. And so I think that those things are important to do, but I also acknowledge that that's time that it takes to do that. And it's a zero sum, both to do that kind of relationship building, advocating, as well as to do the conferences. I mentioned Ms. Schultz made a presentation recently at Georgetown that I went to, and it was terrific. And I thought to myself, we should be doing more of this. But it begs the question, and I wish some of our teachers were here, because now I understand how they feel. You want to add these things? What are you going to take off the plate? And that's the question that I would have for this group, because I think, if we really want to be impactful, we should be doing less and doing it better. So I'm all in on doing this. I think that we are in a unique position here to have more of an impact and to be more thought leaders. But that being said, I would only be willing to do that if we then have some understanding of, okay, these are some things perhaps that we're not going to do. And in terms of the communication plan and the measurement and all that, I think that's a bit overkill, personally, at this point. I think we're measuring things to death, and sometimes if you measure too much, then, I'm not sure how effective that is. It's now created a whole new system for us to have to worry about. So, but thank you for putting this forward.
Thank you. Is there anybody that didn't speak that wants to before I do go-backs? Okay, I have Tammy and then Pat.
When I look at what you've laid out here, I agree with Ms. Schultz that we already have the structure in place, but we are not doing it. As Ms. Reed said, we are not accomplishing it. And so, again, going back to the strategic plan that we're putting together, these should be strategic goals of us. And I do feel when we go to these conferences, and we as the people are still enamored with us when we go to, the NSBA. They're like, oh, Fairfax County? Oh, you go to Fairfax County. So, yeah, we still got that when we go there. But who presented this year? No one. And if we want to continue to be seen as leaders, which we should be touting our things. But I think what we're all saying, and you said it well, like you feel like the teachers, what are you going to take off my plate so I have time? And what you need is unencumbered time to plan a presentation that is worthy, that is nationally worthy, and we all know that takes time. And we as a board have not had that time for very good reasons. But if we lay it out here and then we put it as a strategic goal, I think we'll be more likely to do that. Because while we each, and Ryan has done a great job, Patty has done a great job, all of us who've had that everyone who's had a legislative bent about them has done well, but we haven't done it effectively, and we haven't done it as a national leader as we should. So having these things before us and then helping us prioritize, I think, will be important as we move forward. But so I agree with some of these things that are out there, and I thank you for bringing them forward in a way that can be incorporated into a broader plan later on.
Thank you. Pat?
Yeah, on number 2, sharing successes, I think something that would help me is, and maybe, I don't know who would be tasked with this, maybe our helpers in the school board office, just to send out the calendar. Here's, right, so here's the dates, here are the events, and so we all know what that is. And so at least that would help me know what's on the horizon, and then I could kind of get myself organized to maybe do something or start something. On long-term change, I'm agreeing with Tad that I feel like this is more part of our strategic work with the superintendent, and that probably something we would do more with staff, and a lot of work. And I would just say, in general, I mean, you're right. Don't put something on the plate without taking something off. But this is the kind of thing. This is why we are. You know what I mean? We're leaders, not managers. We do too much managing, so we take managing off the plate, so we have time to lead. And that, I think, is where we should find the time.
Okay, so I'm going to make a proposal and see what people think about it. It seems like really this is work we should start to probably try to more detail starting in September, because I get the impression we need to get through more of the work with the strategic plan and to do that piece. And then part of that could be the discussion with the superintendent about which of these topics and what information they could provide. I get the feeling that people kind of like the structure we already have, a federal and a state legislation person, so we could have them perhaps take the lead with some of this. And that not go too far down the road about how we develop the communication plan, but start on this and then get to the point where we do that. I mean, what I heard over and over from the board at the retreat is we want to be strategic. We want to change people's thinking, and there's things we want to change in this school system that we know we can't do without that. So is that a reasonable plan going forward? We continue the talk with the superintendent about the topics, get through the July work with the strategic plan, and then in September get more detailed to how we do the process. Elizabeth?
I guess I want a little bit of a clarification, because I'm hearing talk a little bit around the issue that I brought up. How is this fundamentally because obviously I wasn't present for your conversation within the committee, how does this differ, operationally, functionally, from the state, federal liaison roles, the forum roles? What is the outcropping of this that's different from the infrastructure that we already have on the board?
I think the biggest difference is that we're strategic about only picking a couple of topics and putting our resources and focus to change with that, rather than throughout the year somebody coming up with an idea or another idea and we keep adding ideas. That we really focus ourselves to two things, and we might decide it's three. He suggested 2 lobbying efforts that we really think that the board as a majority can support, that we want to affect change with.
But doesn't that presume that you establish, a year in advance what you're going to work on, and therefore it takes everything else off the table? Therefore, there's no opportunity, as, for example, maybe there's something that we come across in attending VSBA or NSBA or something that comes up, on the national scene that, in the face of education. I mean, I'm hesitant to say that we're committing as a board a year in advance to take take all the options off the table, and that we won't entertain any advocacy beyond that which we stroke onto, an agenda, 11 and a half months prior.
I guess I see it a little differently, because we're still going to have our legislative packet. We're going to do those pieces. But the issues that we talked about with the superintendent in that governance work session were the big things that we need to lobby for to get changes to do what we want to do. When the idea of graduation requirements and related assessments came up. And this is going to be the will of the board of where we want to go. But I see it differently than ad hoc issues. Ryan?
So just responding to Ms. Schultz's question, over the past couple of years, we've accelerated our timeline for the legislative program. In past years, we've done it in November, which has given us very little time to develop and begin our advocacy. This year, we started in September. Ideally, what we can do is start even in July, so that when I go to the state level, I can take those same priorities. What we lose in that is the ability to adapt to things that come up later in the year before the start of the session. However, we generally have a work session to deal with those. So what we can do is just continue to accelerate that.
Okay, so any other comments? Okay. So are we okay? I want to see some head nodding with getting through the July retreat, at the same time making the superintendent aware that we are interested in finding our couple of topics, because it's vital that she's part of that discussion about what the topics are, and that more in the September time frame, we'll come back to this and figure out our plan moving forward. Is that reasonable? Okay. So I'm just going to go through the rest of this quickly. So, I'm sorry, Pat.
My only concern is, could we get the dates on the presentations sooner than
Yes.
that? Okay.
I just got it today.
Okay, that's fine.
So,
but just before
Pam
July.
shook her head. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
thank
We
you.
can
That's-
send that out to you tomorrow. So the sharing success action steps with the presentations, you'll look at the dates. I don't get the feeling that we're ready to say, yes, go do something right now, but once you get the dates, we can make a decision about that. And you can let me know if you have any advocacy about that. The long-term change action steps, and that's one thing we talked about in governance, was, okay, too much right now. We can come back to that. The last part was the board meetings, efficient and effective. I'd like to delay anything on that. I don't think that people are interested in doing more work in that right now. Let me know if you're interested in that. We can always put it back on the agenda to talk about. Okay, I don't see anybody saying, yeah, let's go down the road with that page right now. Ted?
Yes, I want to go down this road.
Okay.
I don't know when, right, if we're not going to do it now, but I don't want this to drop off because I thought these are excellent ideas. So maybe we
Okay.
can revisit this in 3 months.
So are you fine with that? We'll keep the page 3. We're not going to address it right now, but we can come back to it in the fall. Okay? All right. So there's our plan moving forward with that. And I know that you guys kind of got that over there. Okay. The last thing on the agenda for the governance committee is the instruction program and learning environment treatment of students and operational expectations. So I'm going to provide you a context with this that hopefully will calm some people down. Last July, this ended up on the governance committee's agenda to look at this, and it has been on our agenda the whole year. We've done some work with it. Some things were changed. Typically, what we do is we look at the OE part, our values, those statements, and then we look at the measures. So coming out of that governance committee meeting, the recommendation was that we don't recommend any changes to those right now. Some of the items that we talked about were already dealt with. There was one that we changed a measure about sleep logs. There was a discussion when we talked about the TJ math and some of those other things that we didn't want to make specific measurements. These 2 OEs are coming back to the board reporting in May. So my advice is that we don't go down the road right now with, okay, do we want to change them? Do we want to change the measures? We're going to get this in May. We can look at the report in May. I think that, we're in the strategic planning. We're going to want to focus on things for kids. And when we get the report in May would be the time that we look at the measures. We see if there are too many. Are our OE values too much? I know Dr. Garza has talked with the LT members about this. And then we can have a full, fresh started discussion after we get the reports in May, because they're preparing those now. Megan.
So I very much appreciate where you're going with this. What I did want to share with our colleagues is, just like earlier with the CIP discussion, and Pat Hines, I'm going to channel you right now because one of them is instructional programs. And if you count them up, there's 22 measures under that. And then there's 14 measures under the learning environment treatment of students. And I guess what I'd really hoped our work on governance was that before we, got to May, that we could have actually come to you all and said, in working with Dr. Garza on this, it's a goal that we're not looking at 22 measures for instructional programs. Because I feel like when we get to these review reports, as Ms. Smith pointed out, we're always so rushed because we read those monitoring reports, and then by the time we get to the discussion on, so what do we think of the measures, people were already drinking out of the fire hose just trying to absorb the report. And at the board table with limited time, we don't then, I think, have those substantive discussions of which of these measures we think were meaningful, which ones are just a lot of work for staff. So I think what I would hope is that maybe in the limited time we have this evening, even if people just want to speak to, is there something that we can do at governance maybe before we find ourselves in May related to these? Because I read through them extensively last night, both the 14 and the 22 measures, so 36 measures. And I not only worry about staff time, but more importantly, I'm worried that these are not actually best capturing what we're doing as a system and informing both the board and the public about how we're doing. So I have real concerns about both.
So my advocacy would be that we do delay that discussion because those reports are being prepared. And really, my best advice to the board is when you read the report, when it comes to us in May, that you just put a little note or a little checkpoint. Okay, this information's great to have. This isn't worthwhile to me. And just when you read the information, have that in your mind. And also, you can now look at the value statements we had and say, do they really capture the main things that we want for this school system? And so when you read the report, do it. But it's getting late now, and they're doing the reports anyway, so I think we should move forward. I think I had Sandy and then Pat.
And I appreciate you mentioning that a couple of things changed on the measurements. I don't see the measurement change, however, on what was posted. The 1.10 doesn't reflect the change. So can you explain to me why?
I don't know. I was looking at it last night.
I had asked Dr. Dockery that.
Yeah, it doesn't have
Dr. Dockery?
all those
Because I
changes that we made about the logs, but
Right.
that was already brought to the board
right.
in a session months ago. So
So that's why I had asked Dr. Dockery if she could. Mrs. Smith is saying the same thing, that the measurement here is not reflective of the change that you brought to us. It's not reflective.
Mr. Smith.
I don't think it was ever reflected in there.
The research that I did on that was that I believe that to reflect the desire to have sleep nights, the
School nights. Right.
that Liz changed the logs, because what's reported in the youth survey is, what do you remember about the average night of sleep that you got during this week? And so in order to reflect your desire to capture the Sunday through Thursday, she changed the logs. And so there was a fall collection, and there's the spring collections just occurred, and it's capturing the information in the logs.
But
Go ahead.
my recollection was, because this grant is only a 3-year grant, that we did decide, and I believe the board adopted, that we would use the youth risk survey, which does have school nights. So at least that's my recollection, that was what our measurement was going to be moving forward. And there's in 1.10, it doesn't specify school nights. So I think we did make a change that's just not reflected here.
So rather than taking the time here,
Yeah.
let me work with Pam and Kim to find it, because I thought that we'll find the work session where we talked about that with the board, because I thought the language had been changed to represent school nights.
Right.
And Kim's talking about it being the way the sleep. Let us do the research, and we'll get back to the
Okay.
board about that. Okay.
Right, because I know you did bring it to us, and we did adopt it, and so we just need to make sure it's reflected.
Okay. I'm gone. We're done. Oh, Pat, I'm sorry.
Me, I'm sorry. And I am just asking for clarification. So I share Megan's frustration because we always get to these meetings where we look at the data and it's the time to look at the data. It's not the time to look at what the report is. You know what I mean? We vote on accepting the report because it's the report that we asked to get, right? And then there's never any time to say, let's change the report that we get next time. So are you saying that at the May meeting, we're going to do both? We're going to accept this report and we're going to make changes for next year?
There will be the work session to get the report. Then there will be a governance work session. And at that governance work session that same day is when you'll be asked, do we like our OE value statements? Do we want to change them? We don't have to wordsmith it there. You can tell the governance committee, all right, we want to get rid of some or keep some. There needs to be consensus from the board to get the governance committee to do the actual work. And then part of that can be it's too many measures. And we don't write the measures, staff does. So the advice might be, okay, let's direct the superintendent to come to the governance committee with less measures. So we will take the time to do that at the May work session. Okay? All right, now can I be out? Going, gone. This work session is done.
You're just trying to get to Bunko.
Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's continue on with the PAC.